She arrived with one bag, a Bible, 2 dresses, and a leather journal filled with more knowledge than most doctors would ever have. He expected a quiet woman who could cook and survive the cold. Instead, she knelt in the snow, tasted his creek water with bare fingers, stood up and said, "Copper, someone is poisoning your cattle on purpose." And then she looked him dead in the eye, this stranger she'd married 3 days ago by proxy, and said, "We move the herd, tonight, in the dark, in the blizzard." The most powerful man in the county wanted to destroy them. He had no idea what was coming for him. Welcome to a channel built on the soul of the American West. Stories of fierce love, impossible courage, and the bond between people who choose each other when the whole world says they shouldn't. Every story here is one worth riding hard for. The most dangerous weapon in any fight is a woman who knows exactly what she's doing and refuses to be told she doesn't. Like this video if Clara already has your respect. Share it, subscribe, and join us every week for another story the West never forgot.
That telegram cost Silas 42 cents he plain did not have. He stood there in the Bitter Creek telegraph office, boots caked with frozen mud, feeling an exhaustion so deep it felt like his bones were turning to dust. The man behind the counter, a skinny fellow named Peterson, had seen about half the ranchers in this territory go broke, and he would not even look Silas in the eye as he took the coins. "You certain about this, Boone?" Silas clenched his jaw tight. "Just send it. Sending for a bride you have never met is a heck of a gamble when you can barely feed yourself. I did not ask for your opinion. I asked you to send the message." Peterson just shrugged his shoulders and started tapping out the message to the Missouri Matrimonial Agency. Silas watched every single click of that machine, feeling like each one was locking a door he could never open again. And maybe it was. Outside, the December wind was so sharp it felt like it had a personal vendetta against him. His horse, Sorrow, a name he had given her back when he could still find a little humor in things, stomped her feet to fight off the cold. Silas pulled himself up into the saddle and pointed the horse toward home, if a man could still call it that. The ranch, which had been in his family for 11 long years, looked like the good Lord had quit on it before he was finished. The fences were drooping under a heavy snow that would not be gone until April. The barn leaned over like a man who had had too much to drink. And the cattle. Lord, the cattle. They were dying. Not all at once, because that would have been a kindness. They died one by one, a couple each week, stumbling around looking confused until they just laid down for the last time. Silas had lost 14 head in the last month. The meat was spoiled, ruined by whatever was working on them from the inside. He had tried everything he could think of. He changed their feed, moved them out to a different pasture, and even spent money he did not have on a veterinarian from Laramie. The vet took one long look, shook his head, and then charged Silas $20 just to tell him, "I do not know." But the bank knew. The bank knew exactly how many head of cattle he had left, and they knew to the day how much longer he could keep pretending this was all going to be all right. Harlan Crow, the man from the bank, had made that crystal clear about 2 weeks ago. "Spring," Crow had said, standing in Silas's kitchen like he already owned the place, which, truth be told, he just about did. "You have got until spring to get your payments caught up, or we will foreclose. That gives you 3 months, Boone. You better get right with God and get right with your debts." Silas had wanted to send his fist straight through Crow's smug face. He wanted to so badly his hand trembled just thinking about it, but wanting something does not change the numbers. And the numbers said he was drowning, so he did something a desperate man would do. He sent for a wife. The answer came back quicker than he figured. Clara Whitmore, age 28, from Missouri, never married, with no family. References could be provided if he asked. She could get there before Christmas if he could send the money for her travel. He sold his dead wife's wedding ring to pay for her ticket. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now. The flu took her fast, which he was grateful for. At least she did not suffer for long, but her passing left him all alone in a place that really took two people to make a go of it. And he had been losing that fight ever since. He kept telling himself that Sarah would have understood. He told himself this was not a betrayal, it was just simple arithmetic, but he was not entirely sure he believed his own words. Clara's train was supposed to arrive on the 18th of December. Silas spent the days leading up to it trying to make the ranch look less like a boneyard. He burned the carcasses of the cattle he could not bury in the frozen earth. He patched up the biggest holes in the roof of the barn. He scrubbed 3 years of a lonely man's grime out of the kitchen until his hands were cracked and bleeding. But none of it seemed to make much of a difference. The morning Clara was due to arrive, Silas stood on the town platform watching the train pull in through the swirling snow. His stomach felt like he had swallowed a ball of barbed wire. What in the world was he supposed to say to a woman he had basically bought like a head of cattle? The train hissed and groaned to a stop, surrounded by a cloud of steam. The passengers started to get off. There was a merchant, a couple of miners, and a family with loud children. And then he saw her. Clara Whitmore was not what Silas had pictured in his mind. She was not a fragile, delicate flower. She stood about 5'6", with solid shoulders, and she wore a plain brown traveling coat that looked like it had seen its share of miles. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, showing some early streaks of gray. Her face had sharp angles, making her look like she was constantly weighing and measuring everything she saw. She spotted him right away, the only man on the platform who looked desperate enough to be waiting on a mail-order bride, and she walked right up to him. "Mr. Boone," she said. Her voice was steady and came from the Midwest, with no hint of romance in it at all. "Miss Whitmore," he replied, reaching for her suitcase. She handed it over without any fuss. "It is Mrs. Boone. We were married by proxy by a judge in Kansas City 3 days ago. It saves time." Silas just blinked. "We are already married?" "Yes. The agency handles it that way. It makes things simpler in the eyes of the law. Do you have a problem with that?" He probably should have had a problem with it, but mostly he just felt a sense of relief that he would not have to go through some clumsy wedding ceremony in front of the whole town. No problem at all. "Good. Is that your wagon?" He nodded his head toward the buckboard he had to borrow from his neighbor. His own wagon had a broken axle he could not afford to get fixed. "The ranch is about an hour north of here. The roads are pretty bad." "Roads are always bad in the winter," she said. She climbed up onto the seat without even waiting for him to help her. "Let us go. We are wasting daylight." That ride north was the longest hour of Silas's entire life. Clara did not bother with small talk. She did not ask about the town or the weather or any of the other polite nonsense people usually use to fill the silence. She just sat there beside him, quiet, studying the passing landscape like she was trying to burn it into her memory. Finally, she broke the silence. "How many head?" "What is that?" "Your cattle. How many do you run?" 63. I had 77 back in September." "You have lost 14 in 3 months." It was not a question, it was a statement. "Yeah. What is killing them?" Silas's hands tightened on the reins. "I do not know. The vet could not figure it out. They just get weak, they stop eating, and then they die." "Is it all of them, or just certain ones? Are the deaths happening all over, or is there a pattern? Like their age, their location, which pasture they have been grazing in?" Silas had to stop and think about that. Nobody had ever asked him questions like that before. "Mostly it is the ones drinking from the South Creek, the cattle that drink from the North Spring. They are actually doing better." Clara's eyes got sharp. "Show me the South Creek as soon as we get there." "It is just water. If your cattle are dying and there is a pattern, it is not just water. Show me." There was something in the way she said it that made Silas close his mouth and just nod his head. They got to the ranch just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon. Clara climbed down from the wagon and just stood there, perfectly still, taking it all in. The leaning barn, the patched-up fence, the cattle huddled together against the biting wind, with their ribs showing through their hides. Silas braced himself, waiting for her to cry or start complaining, or maybe even get back in the wagon and demand that he take her right back to town. But instead, she walked straight over to the nearest heifer. The animal was one of the sick ones. Silas could tell by the way it was standing, with its head hanging low, its legs trembling, and its eyes looking dull and empty. Clara walked around it slowly, looking at it from every angle. Then she did something that made Silas hold his breath. She lifted the heifer's lip to look at its gums. She pressed her fingers against its neck, and then she ran her hand down its spine, feeling every single bone. How long has this one been sick? It has been weak for a while. It stopped eating about 3 days ago. She is not going to make it, Clara said, and her voice was as cold and clear as a doctor's. But the others might. Take me to the South Creek. Now. But it is almost dark. Then bring a lantern. Let us move. Silas grabbed a lamp and led her across the frozen pasture to where the creek ran down through a small ravine. The water itself looked clear enough, and it was moving pretty fast, so there was no ice on it yet. There was nothing that looked obviously wrong. Clara knelt down right at the edge, dipped her fingers into the cold water, and then touched them to her tongue. Silas just stared at her, just stared at... What in the world are you... Copper. What? There is copper in this water. It is not enough to kill them quickly, but it is enough to poison them slowly over time. Where is the source? Upstream. Is there a mine up there? Silas felt a cold chill run right down his back, and it had nothing to do with the weather. Crow. Harlan Crow, the banker. He has got some mining operations about 2 miles west of here. But that runoff should not be getting into my creek. Well, it is, Clara said as she stood up, brushing the snow from her skirt. And it is killing your cattle. Your herd, which tells me someone either doesn't give a damn or they're trying to hide it. Good Lord. Well, praying isn't going to clean up your water, but I reckon I can. She spun on her heel and headed back to the house, leaving Silas standing in the snow, a lantern swinging in one hand and his whole world shifting right under his boots. He finally caught up to her on the porch. Who in the Sam Hill are you? She paused, her hand right on the door. I done told you. I'm Clara Whitmore, your wife. That ain't what I mean. The way you looked that cow over, the way you checked the water, that's not how a regular woman acts. Regular women don't make it out here, Mr. Boone. I learned that lesson when I was young. She pushed the door right open. I was an apprentice to a traveling livestock doctor for 6 years. I learned more about what ails cattle than most fancy veterinarians. When the agency asked me what I could do, I told them. They said you needed a hand on a ranch, so here I am. They never told me. You never asked. You just asked for someone tough and used to hard times. Well, you got her. She stepped on in, her eyes taking in the simple kitchen. This the only room that's heated. The stove's in here. Bedroom has a fireplace, but I haven't lit it. We need to lay out a plan, and I'm not about to do it while I'm freezing. Silas got the bedroom fire going while Clara unpacked the one small bag she carried. It held almost nothing at all. Just 2 dresses, a simple nightgown, a Bible, and a leather-bound journal that was crammed with notes and drawings. When he got back to the kitchen, she had that journal spread open on the table. Sit down. He sat. Clara thumbed through pages filled with neat, steady script. Symptoms, remedies, stories of past cases. Copper poisoning shows up in stages. First they stop eating, then they get weak and start to stumble. You'll see a yellow color in their gums and eyes. In the end, their liver just gives out. If your herd has been drinking from that creek all autumn, the ones showing signs now are likely too far gone to save. But the ones that still look healthy, we can pull them through. How do we do that? We have to move them off that bad water, and right now. All of them, tonight if we can. They need clean water and an iron supplement to fight the copper inside them. We're going to need some scrap iron, molasses, and time. Silas rubbed his tired face. The North Spring. That is where they have to go. Every last one of them. How many hired hands you got? I don't have any. It is just me. She looked up at him, her gaze sharp. "You are running 63 head of cattle all by yourself. I cannot afford any help." "Well, you sure can't afford to lose any more cattle. We move them tonight, just you and me. It is about a half-mile to the north pasture, I reckon." "Through all this snow? In the pitch black?" "Miss Whitmore." "Mrs. Boone," she corrected him. "And I did not come all this way to sit here and watch your ranch wither and die because you are too cautious. We either move them now or we lose them. It is your call." Silas just stared at this woman he had known for less than 3 hours. This woman who had tasted poisoned water, figured out what was killing his herd, and was now telling him to drive his cattle through a blizzard in the dead of night. "You're being serious. I don't ever joke about livestock." She got to her feet. "Get your warmest coat on. We're burning daylight and we ain't got any to spare." They pushed the cattle north into a darkness so thick Silas could barely make out his own hands. The wind was screaming and the snow was coming down sideways. The sickest animals stumbled and went down. Some of them never got up again. Clara was right there beside them, shouting words of encouragement, physically shoving the weaker ones to keep them moving. She never once complained, never even hesitated. When one young heifer finally collapsed in a heap, Clara knelt down beside her in the snow. "She is gone. We have to leave her." "No." Clara's voice was like flint. "We marked the spot where she fell. We'll come back for her tomorrow to examine her. We have to be absolutely sure of the diagnosis." By the time they finally got the surviving cattle into the north pasture, Silas had lost all feeling in his feet, and Clara's lips had turned a frightening shade of blue from the cold. But the animals were drinking clean water, huddled up together against the wind. They were alive. They stumbled back to the house just as the sun came up, all gray and miserable. Inside, Clara fell into a chair. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from pure exhaustion. Silas built the fire back up in the stove and put a pot of coffee on. Neither one of them said a word for a very long time. Finally, Clara cleared her throat and said, "How deep are you in debt?" "What's that?" "To the bank." "How much do you owe them?" Silas swallowed hard. $1,800 due in March. "And do you have it?" "No." "Can you get it?" "Not unless the price of cattle triples, and my 60 head of cattle suddenly turn into 100. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This poisoning. If Crow's mining operation is the cause, he is legally responsible. Crow owns the bank. He's not about to take himself to court." "No, but if we can prove it in public, he will lose his standing around here. And politicians care a whole lot more about their standing than they do about one little ranch on the verge of failing." She pulled her journal a little closer. "We are going to need proof. Samples of the water, samples of the soil from upstream. We need other ranchers to speak up. Are you the only one getting hit by this?" "Martinson, 2 ranches south of here. He lost some of his herd this fall, too." "Then we will build our case. We will write down everything. We will show a pattern that he cannot possibly deny." Clara looked straight at him, and for the very first time Silas saw something else in her eyes besides cold calculation. "You sent for me because you were at the end of your rope. I came here because I was at the end of mine, too. But being desperate can make people do some amazing things. Mr. Boone, sometimes it is what makes them survive." Silas wanted to say something right then. He wanted to thank her or say he was sorry or something. He did not even know what. But instead, he just gave a slow nod. They took turns sleeping that first day. One of them would watch over the cattle while the other one got some rest. When Silas woke up in the afternoon, Clara was already back outside examining the dead heifer they had left behind in the south pasture. She was making notes in her journal with fingers so cold they could barely grip the pencil. By that evening, she had 3 full pages of her observations and a theory that made the blood in Silas's veins run cold. This was not some accidental runoff, she said, showing him the mineral deposits she had scraped from the creek bed. This is highly concentrated. Somebody is diverting this water on purpose. Why in the world would they do that? To run you off your land so they can buy it for cheap. It has happened before. She tapped a page in her journal. I wrote about a case down in Kansas 2 years ago. A mine owner poisoned 3 small ranches, bought them all up when the bank foreclosed, and then sold them to the railroad for 4 times what he paid. It is probably Crow, but we are going to need proof. Real, solid proof, not just a good theory. The very next morning, Clara began to mix up the iron tonic. She boiled scrap metal in water, strained it, and then mixed in molasses to make it taste better. They gave a dose to every single animal in that north pasture, forcing the dark liquid down their stubborn throats. By the 3rd day, the first heifer was standing up longer and walking a little steadier. By the 5th day, 3 more of them had started eating again. Folks in town began to take notice. Peterson, a man from the telegraph office, rode out, wanting to see the miracle cure folks were buzzing about. Then Mr. Martinson came, and after him a few others. Clara met every last one of them with the same calm, businesslike manner. She explained all about the copper poisoning, laid out her notes for them to see, and even offered to test their water if they'd cover the cost of the supplies. Some of them just laughed it off, while others got plain mad. But there were some, the ones who were losing their own cattle, who paid close attention. And that is when Harlan Crow made his appearance. He rode onto Silas's place on the 8th day, acting like he owned the deed, which, to be fair, he almost did. He had 2 fellas with him, the kind you hire for their fists, not their brains. "Boone," he said, "heard you went and got yourself a wife." Silas came out onto the porch. He could see Clara through the window behind him, watching, taking it all in. "News gets around." "It surely does," Crow said. "I also heard she's been telling tall tales about poisoned water and pointing fingers." "She's been saving my herd," Silas stated plainly. Crow offered a smile that never touched his eyes. "Well now, that's a curious thing, seeing as how those cattle are the collateral on your loan, which means if they're getting sick, that collateral is losing its value. And that means, technically, you have been breaking our agreement for months." The bottom dropped out of Silas's stomach. "That's not—" "But I am a reasonable man," Crow said, leaning forward on his saddle. "So here's the deal I'm putting on the table. You sign over 60% ownership of this ranch to me. We will just call it a little restructuring, and I will forgive the whole debt right now. You just keep on working this land, and I'll take the profits till it's all paid up. Sound fair?" "That ain't fair. That's pure thievery. That's how things are done. I'll give you till Christmas to think on it." After that, Crow just gave a little shrug. Well, banks get mighty nervous about poor investments. He turned his horse on a dime and trotted off, his boys right behind him. Silas just stood there, planted to the ground till the cabin door creaked open. Clara came out, holding that little book of hers. "How much of that did you catch?" "Every last word." She was real quiet for a spell. Then she said, "We have 16 days till Christmas." "I know." "Then we have 16 days to prove he's the one who poisoned your creek. We'll write down every detail so tight he can't wiggle out of it, and we'll raise such a fuss that foreclosing on you would be the dumbest move he could make." Silas finally turned and really looked at her. "That's just not possible." Clara stared right back. "You sent for a wife you couldn't rightly afford because you were about to go under." "I married a man I'd never met because my other choices were worse. We're already knee-deep in the impossible, Mr. Boone." She went back inside, already scribbling in her book, already making a plan. And watching her, Silas felt something that should have scared him half to death, but it didn't. He had asked for a companion. What the good Lord sent him was a fighter, and Clara Whitmore Boone was just getting warmed up. Clara was already up and dressed and out in the yard, before the sun even thought about rising, testing little jars of water with chemicals she produced from her satchel, like a magician at a county fair. Silas watched her from the kitchen window, wondering what in blue blazes kind of mail-order bride service taught its women about chemistry. He brought a cup of coffee out to her. She took it, her eyes still fixed on her work. "It's a whole lot stronger about 200 yards that way. Somebody is for sure sending their dirty water straight into your creek. Can you prove that?" "Not right this second, but I will." She corked a little glass bottle, her hands shaking as she put a label on it. That cold was sharp as a knife. I need a look at Crow's mining camp up close. That's called trespassing. It's called gathering facts. There's a big difference, not to the men Crow hires. Silas cinched his coat up tighter. If they find you poking around up there, they'll... What? Shoot a woman? Here in Wyoming territory, where a good woman is harder to find than a gold nugget. Clara finally looked up at him. They will politely ask me to leave the property. And while they're busy being gentlemen, I'll be counting their runoff barrels and making a map of their drainage ditches in my head. You're out of your mind. I'm thorough. Let's go. They rode toward the headwaters as the sun rose all pale and weak. The whole world was just frozen and empty. Nothing but sagebrush and snow and big old rocks that looked like God himself had thrown them down in a fit of anger. Crow's mine was tucked into a valley where the creek began, just a jumble of shacks and machinery and men who looked mean enough to kill a man for a warm supper. Clara took it all in from a ridge high above, making little drawings in her journal. You see that pool of runoff water? That's not how nature made it. They dug that little ditch on purpose to go around the pond meant to clean the water. All that poison water with copper in it is flowing right down into the creek. Good Lord. The Lord didn't dig that ditch. Crow's people did. She snapped her book shut. We're going to need one of his workers to talk. Somebody who will stand up and say they were ordered to dump that waste. Ain't no miner going to talk against the man who signs his paycheck. Not so long as he's still getting paid. No. Clara's eyes had that smart, calculating look again. But a man who's been fired, a man with a grudge, he might just be willing to sing a different tune. You can't just... I can, and I'm fixin' to. Take me into town. The ride to Bitter Creek took a good hour. Clara was quiet the whole way, and you could tell her mind was churning over things Silas couldn't even guess at. When they tied up their horses in front of the general store, she looked at him. I need you to march into that land office. Get me a copy of every mineral rights paper filed in this county for the last 2 years. I don't give a damn what it costs. Clara, tell me, do you trust me? It was the first time she'd ever asked him something so direct, something that wasn't about livestock or water. Silas looked at this woman he'd only known for a handful of days, this complete stranger who figured out what was killing his cattle and was now putting together some kind of legal fight he barely understood. Yeah, I trust you. Something changed in her eyes then. It wasn't exactly softness, but it was something close. Then get those papers. I'll find you at the telegraph office in 2 hours. She disappeared into the store before he could ask another question. The clerk at the land office was a fella named Simmons, with a face like a slapped weasel, and he made Silas pay $3 for copies that should have been free. But the papers were all there. Every one of Crow's mineral claims, his water rights, every piece of land he'd bought up in the last 18 months. Silas laid them all out on a dusty table in the back and began to read. What he discovered sent a chill right through him. Crow had gotten permits to divert water on 6 different properties. 6 of them. Every single one was a small ranch. And every single one was either already lost to the bank or about to be. The whole crooked pattern was laid out right there in black and white. He scooped up the papers and hurried over to the telegraph office. Clara was already in there, talking low with Peterson, the operator. When she saw Silas, she just gave a single nod. Did you get it? 6 ranches, all the same story. Good. Mr. Peterson here has been a big help. Seems that 3 of those ranches sent telegrams to the Territorial Mining Office last year to complain about their water being poisoned. The complaints were sent, and then they just vanished into thin air. No one looked into it. No one followed up. Peterson started to look mighty uncomfortable. I probably shouldn't have said anything about that. You should have said something to somebody a long time ago, Clara told him, but her voice was gentle. How much does Crow pay you to keep your mouth shut? Peterson's face went white as a sheet. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm just asking a simple question. Does he pay you? Just a yes or a no? $10 a month. To tell him if anybody sends a wire about his operations? Clara took out her little notebook. Write that down for me. Put your name and the date on it. I can't do that. If he finds out, he won't. Not till the time is right. Clara's voice was like honey, but with a core of pure steel. But when that time comes, what you say will help save 6 ranches. And maybe it'll help you sleep a little better at night, too. Write it down, Mr. Peterson." Peterson wrote it all down, his hand trembling the whole time. Once they were outside, Silas took hold of Clara's arm. "You can't just... You're gathering all this like you're some kind of big city lawyer, but we're not. What in the hell are you planning to do?" Clara pulled her arm away. "My plan is to make such a public ruckus that Crow can't possibly foreclose. To stir up so much trouble that the territorial judge has to get involved. To lay his whole rotten scheme bare so even his own partners at the bank turn their backs on him." She started walking back toward the wagon. "This ain't my first rodeo, Silas. Not this exact situation, but I've seen its cousin." "When?" She stopped walking. For a long, quiet moment, she just stood there. Then she said, "Kansas, 3 years back. There was a cattle buyer who was cheating ranchers, using scales that were rigged to lie, and buying up whole herds for half of what they were worth. I wrote it all down, built the case, and I took it straight to the biggest newspaper in the territory. He lost every penny he had." Her voice was flat, with no feeling in it at all. "He also set fire to my boss's barn to get even. Killed 12 good horses. That was the day I learned that truth and justice are fine things, but they don't do you much good without a solid plan." Jesus Christ, Clara. I didn't tell you because it's in the past. What matters is that we have 16 days, well, 15 now, and I know exactly how to build a case that's as solid as a rock. But you need to tell me right now. Are you in this with me, or do you want me on the next train headed back east?" Silas just stared at her. This woman who had come with just one suitcase and a little book full of secrets that could either save him or ruin them both. "I'm with you. Then we'd better get a move on." The next week flew by in a dizzying rush of long, hard days and short, restless nights. Clara went and talked to every rancher inside of 20 miles, writing down stories of sick cattle, bad water, and threats of foreclosure. Some folks slammed the door in her face. Some told her she was nothing but a troublemaker. But a few of them, the ones who were desperate, the ones who had already lost it all, they talked. Martinson gave her a jar of dirt from his southermost pasture. The widow Harris showed her where she had to burn the carcasses of her dead cattle. Old Tom Brennan, who'd lost his place to Crow 6 months earlier, sat right there in Silas's kitchen and told them exactly how it all went down. He came to me all smiles and promises at first, said he could help me with my debt, buy me some more time. All I had to do was sign a paper giving him part ownership. Tom's old hands were shaking around his coffee mug. I signed it. Didn't feel like I had any other choice. 2 months later, he demanded the whole loan be paid off right then. Said I broke a rule in the contract I didn't even know was there. He took everything. Clara wrote down every single word. At night, Silas and her would work by the light of the oil lamp, sorting all the evidence. They had stacks for poisoned water, for crooked contracts, for stories from witnesses, for financial papers. The kitchen table was buried under it all. "You ought to get some sleep," Silas told her, close to midnight on the 10th day. "Sleep is something rich folks can afford," Clara said, without looking up from her work. "We have 6 days until Christmas. 6 days till Crow comes for your answer. We're not going to have enough proof, are we?" She finally lifted her head and met his gaze. "I don't know. Maybe if we can convince one of Crow's own men to talk. Somebody who actually dug that drainage ditch and is willing to testify. It was on purpose. That is not going to happen." "It just might," Clara said, pulling a slip of paper from her pocket. "There is a fellow by the name of Jack Wheeler. He worked for Crow up until last month. Got let go for drinking. The man is angry, broke, and holed up in a boarding house over in Rock Springs. If anyone is likely to talk, it is him. Rock Springs is a 2-day ride from here. Then we head out tomorrow. Clara, it is December. There is a big storm brewing." "There is always a storm brewing," she said, and got to her feet. "We are going to Rock Springs. We are going to find Wheeler, and we are going to get his testimony. That is the plan." "And what if he refuses to talk?" "Then we will give him a reason to want to." Clara shut her journal. You asked me who I was when I first arrived. I am someone who has survived, Silas, whatever that takes. Are you? He knew he should have said no. He should have told her she was crazy. That they would likely freeze solid on the trail, or that Wheeler would tell them to get lost, or that Crow would catch wind of it and come after them. He should have done the smart thing. Instead, he just said, "We leave at first light." That ride to Rock Springs was a special kind of hell. The temperature plunged below zero. The wind felt like it was slicing right through their clothes. Twice they had to pull over and build a fire just to keep their fingers and toes from freezing off. Clara never said a word of complaint, just kept her horse moving forward, her face looking like it was carved from stone. They finally made it to Rock Springs on the 11th day before Christmas. The whole town was just a dirty coal mining camp, full of drunk miners, worn-out women, and a feeling of violence bubbling right under everything. Clara strode into that boarding house like she was the one holding the deed. "I'm looking for Jack Wheeler." The landlady, a woman with a hard face and suspicious eyes, gave Clara a good look from head to toe. "Does he owe you money?" "No, I'm here to offer him some." Well, that certainly changed her tune. The landlady motioned toward the stairs. "Room 6. He is probably passed out drunk." Wheeler was most definitely drunk. He opened the door in nothing but his undershirt, smelling like a whiskey barrel, with eyes as bloodshot as they were mean. "Who in the hell are you?" "Clara Boone. This is my husband, Silas. We need to have a word with you about Harlan Crow." Wheeler's expression went dark. "Got nothing to say about him. We will give you $50 for 1 hour of your time." That made him pause. $50 was more than most of those miners saw in 2 months. "Get in here." The room was a complete wreck. Empty bottles were everywhere, dirty clothes were piled up, and the whole place smelled of stale liquor and hopelessness. Clara took the only chair and sat in it like it was a throne. Silas stood near the door, keeping watch. "You used to work for Crow's mining operation," Clara stated. It was not a question. "Yeah, I did, right up until that snake fired me." "Why did he fire you?" "Claimed I was drunk on the job." "I was not. Well, not on that particular day, anyway." Wheeler reached for a bottle and took a long pull. "The truth is, I laid eyes on something I was not supposed to see." Clara leaned in a little closer. "And what did you see?" "Crow and his foreman were out there digging a drainage ditch running straight from the waste pond right into the creek. I went and asked them what they were up to. The foreman told me it was not any of my concern. Crow told me if I ever spoke a word of it to anyone, I would live to regret it." Wheeler let out a bitter laugh. "A week later, I was out of a job, blacklisted from every single mine in the territory." "Would you be willing to testify to that in a written statement?" Wheeler's eyes narrowed. "Testify? Are you trying to build some kind of case against Crow?" "Yes, we are." "Then you are even dumber than I figured. Crow owns half the judges in Wyoming. You really think the testimony from some drunk miner is going to make a lick of difference?" "It will if there are enough of us." Clara's voice was low and sure. 6 ranches, Mr. Wheeler. 6 families have been ruined by the very same thing. The water gets poisoned, the cattle die, and then the foreclosure papers get filed. If we can prove he did it on purpose, if we can make enough of a racket that the territorial government has to step in, they will not." Wheeler took another drink. "All you will do is make yourselves his next targets." "We are already his targets," Silas spoke up for the first time. "I have got 6 days before I lose everything my family worked to build. If there is even a small chance your testimony can help, I'm going to take it." Wheeler looked at him, really studied him for a moment, then looked over at Clara. $50. Clara counted out the bills. $50 and your statement written down, signed, and dated. Wheeler spent the next 20 minutes writing. His hand was shaky, but you could still read the words. When he was done, Clara looked it over carefully, then she folded the paper and tucked it inside her journal. "If this ends up in a trial, we will need you to be a witness." "If this ends up in a trial, I will probably end up dead." Wheeler put the money in his pocket. "Crow does not lose, Mrs. Boone. Fellas like him never do. Fellas like him start losing the moment people stop being afraid of them," Clara said as she stood up. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Wheeler." They rode back under the cover of darkness, pushing their horses hard to make up for lost time. Silas could see how tired Clara was by the way she slumped in her saddle, but she never once asked to slow down. "You think his testimony is going to be enough?" he finally asked. "No," she said, "but it is another piece of the puzzle. Another little crack in Crow's armor." She was quiet for a long while. We are going to need one more thing, something big, something that will make the whole town have to pick a side." "Like what?" "I do not know just yet." Her breath puffed out in little white clouds. "But we have got 4 days to come up with something." They finally got back to the ranch on the 13th day before Christmas. The cattle out in the north pasture were looking healthier. Their coats were starting to get a shine back. Their eyes were bright. That iron tonic was doing its job. It looked like they might survive. But looking like it and knowing it are two different things. Clara spent the entire next day putting all of their proof together into one single detailed file. They had witness statements, water test results, bank records, and a timeline of all the foreclosures. She wrote with the kind of focus of a person setting a perfect trap. Silas just watched her, and he felt something change inside his chest. It was a feeling that had nothing to do with business or staying alive, and everything to do with the determined look on her face and the sharp intelligence in her eyes. It was the way she fought for his ranch like it was her own, because legally, it was her own now. That proxy marriage had made it official. But all of this was making it real. "Clara," he said. She looked up from her papers. "When all this is over, if we make it through this—" "When," she corrected him, "not if. When we make it through this. I just want you to know how grateful I am for everything. For you." A bit of the hardness in her face seemed to melt away just for a moment. "Do not be grateful just yet. This fight is not over." That very night, Crow came back. But this time he was not with his hired thugs. He brought the sheriff with him. Silas and Clara went out on the porch to meet them. The sheriff looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Crow looked like he had just won the lottery. "Mr. Boone, Mrs. Boone, the bank has made the decision to move up your foreclosure date. Instead of this spring, you now have until December 25th. That is in 2 days." Clara's hand found Silas's and squeezed it tight. "On what grounds?" Her voice was as steady as a rock. "Devalued collateral because of dying cattle. Failure to maintain the property's standards and your outstanding debts." Crow smiled. "It is all perfectly legal. The sheriff is just here to serve you the official papers." The sheriff held out the documents. Clara took them and read every word. "This is fraud." "This is business," Crow countered. "You have got 48 hours to come up with $1,800, or you get off the property." Crow tipped his hat. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Boone." They rode off, leaving Silas and Clara standing there in the falling snow, holding what felt like a death warrant in their hands. Clear's throat. Clara read that notice 3 times over. Then she looked straight at Silas. "We are out of time." "I know. Which means we cannot afford to wait for a trial or some investigation. We have to bring this out into the light right now. Tomorrow." "How?" Clara's eyes looked as hard and cold as winter stone. "The Christmas gathering. The entire town is going to be there, and that includes Crow. We will present everything right there in public. We will make it impossible for him to squirm his way out of it. He will destroy us. He is already destroying us. At least this way. We go down swinging." She grabbed his arms. "I need you to trust me just one more time. Can you do that?" Silas thought about Sarah. He thought about the ranch his own father had built from nothing. He thought about the last 3 years of just slowly drowning. Then he thought about Clara, This unbelievable woman who had just appeared with a suitcase full of chemistry equipment and a spirit that simply refused to be broken. "Yeah," he said. "I trust you." "Then tomorrow," she said, "we finish this, one way or another." Neither of them got any sleep that night. Clara stayed at the kitchen table, making copies of all their evidence by hand. 3 complete sets. One was for the territorial judge, one was for the newspaper, and one was for the town council. Her handwriting started to get a little shaky as the hours wore on, but she did not stop for a second. Silas kept the coffee pot full and just watched her, feeling completely useless. "There has got to be something I can do." "There is," she said. "Go to every single rancher we spoke with. You tell them they need to be at that Christmas gathering tomorrow. Tell them to bring along any proof they have got." Clara did not even look up from her work. "We need people there, Silas. We need witnesses. We need folks who are willing to stand up in front of everyone and say that Harlan Crow ruined them. Half of them will not show. They are too scared. Then we will have to make do with the half that will." She finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "This plan only works if we are not standing up there all by ourselves. If it is just the 2 of us making accusations, Crow will brush it off as the whining of a failed rancher. But if it is 6 families, or 8 families all telling the exact same story, well, that is a pattern. That is proof." Silas rode out as soon as the sun came up. The first place he stopped was Martinson's, who opened the door with a shotgun in his hands and suspicion in his eyes. "What do you want, Boone?" "There is a Christmas gathering tomorrow. I need you to be there." "And why is that?" "Because Clara plans to call out Crow in front of everyone, and she is going to need witnesses." Martinson let out a laugh, but it was not a happy sound. "You are both out of your minds. Crow will bury you. He is already trying to bury me. The bank forecloses in 2 days. I have got nothing left to lose." Silas tightened his grip on the doorframe. "But you do. You still have your ranch, at least for now. How long do you reckon it will be before Crow comes for you next?" The color drained from Martinson's face. He would not dare. Oh, he would. He did it to Tom Brennan, to the Hendricks widow, and to 5 other ranches that we know of. "What makes you think you are special? You think he is going to stop?" Silas leaned in closer. "Clara has proof. She has water samples, signed statements, and financial records. It is enough to make the territorial government launch an investigation, but only if folks show up. It only works if we make enough noise that they cannot possibly ignore us." Martinson stood there quietly for a very long time. "What time?" 7 o'clock. Bring your soil samples if you still have them. I burned them. I did not want that kind of evidence sitting in my barn." "Then just bring yourself. That will be enough." By noon, Silas had paid a visit to 8 different ranchers. 3 of them agreed to come. 2 of them told him to get lost. 3 were not at home. It was going to have to be enough. He made his way back to the ranch and found Clara standing in the yard next to her journal. She was talking to a man Silas had never seen before. He was a thin, nervous fellow wearing a suit that had clearly seen better days. "Silas, this is Mr. Edmund Pierce. He is a reporter for the Cheyenne Daily Leader." The man stuck out his hand. Silas shook it, feeling confused. "A reporter?" "I wired a message yesterday," Clara explained. "I told him there was a big story brewing about systematic fraud and water poisoning right here in Bitter Creek. He caught the train overnight." Pierce took out a small notebook. "Mrs. Boone has been telling me the whole story." He cleared his throat. "If even half of what she claims is true, this is a major situation. We are talking about multiple ranches, deliberate contamination, and fraudulent foreclosures. This is the kind of story that gets the territorial government involved." Silas looked over at Clara. "You did not tell me you reached out to a newspaper." "I did not want to get your hopes up, just in case he decided not to come." She handed Pierce another folder. "This is everything. The water analysis, the witness statements, the financial patterns. I need you to confirm it all on your own before tomorrow night." "Tomorrow night?" "The Christmas gathering. That is when we are taking this all public. I need you there." Pierce thumbed through the documents, and his expression became more and more serious. Good heavens, Mrs. Boone, do you realize who you are accusing? Harlan Crow has connections that reach all the way to the territorial legislature. If you are wrong about any part of this, I am not wrong. Clara's voice was as hard as iron. Test the water yourself if you do not believe me. Ride on up to his mining operation and take a look at the drainage channel. Go talk to the ranchers who have already lost everything. I am not asking you to just take my word for it. I am asking you to do your job. Pierce stared at her for a long moment. Then he snapped the folder shut. I will have to verify this water contamination myself. Can you show me to the creek? Silas will take you. I have got more work to finish up here. Silas led Pierce upstream to the South Creek. The reporter had brought his own testing kit. It was simple equipment, but it was enough to confirm the presence of copper. He knelt down at the edge of the water, running his tests with the careful precision of a man who had done this many times before. She is right. There is definitely copper contamination in here. The levels are high. He scribbled in his notebook. How many head of cattle have you lost? 14 since September. It would have been a lot more if Clara had not figured things out. Your wife seems to know an awful lot about livestock medicine. She spent 6 years as an apprentice with a traveling horse doctor. She knows more about cattle than most veterinarians do. Pierce looked up from his notes, surprised. A woman apprenticed to a veterinarian. That is highly unusual. Clara is an unusual woman. Silas watched the poisoned water flow past them, carrying its poison downstream. She is also right about everything else. Crow has been systematically ruining small ranches just so he can buy up their land for cheap. The water poisoning is being done on purpose. Can you prove it is deliberate, beyond just the contamination itself? We have a signed statement from one of his former workers, a man by the name of Jack Wheeler. He personally saw Crow and his foreman dig that drainage channel. Pierce began to write even faster. I will need to interview him. He is over in Rock Springs drunk most of the time, but his statement is signed and dated. I will catch the train tonight. If his story checks out, this is front-page news. Pierce stood up, brushing the snow from his trousers. Mrs. Boone, she understands that this could put both of you in real danger, right? Crow is not the type to take this kind of exposure lying down. We are already in danger. The bank forecloses in 48 hours. It cannot get much worse than losing everything you have. Pierce gave him a look that suggested it could definitely get worse, but he did not say it out loud. Back at the ranch, Clara had finished making copies of the documents and was now writing something new. It was a speech. Silas realized she was preparing the exact words she would say at the gathering. The reporter believes you, he said. Good. That gives us one advantage. She did not stop writing. Did Martinson agree to come? Yes, him and 2 others. Maybe a few more will show up if word gets around. It will have to be enough. Clara put her pen down. Crow is going to be there tomorrow. So will the sheriff, the mayor, and probably half the town council. When I stand up and begin presenting the evidence, there is going to be a moment, maybe 30 seconds, where they will be too shocked to do anything. That is our window of opportunity. We have to get through the most important facts before Crow can manage to shut us down. What if he does not let you speak at all? Then I will just have to speak anyway, only louder. She met his gaze. This is going to get ugly, Silas. Crow might have us arrested. He might even try to have us physically thrown out. I need you to be ready for that. I am ready. Are you? Clara stood and walked around the table. Because once we do this, there is no going back. We are burning every single bridge. If we fail, we lose the ranch and likely end up in jail on some made-up charge. If we succeed, we make a powerful enemy who will spend years trying to ruin us. She took his hands in hers. I need you to understand exactly what you are risking. Silas looked down at their joined hands, hers calloused from hard work, his scarred from years of ranching. 2 desperate people who had gambled everything on a marriage that began as a business deal but had turned into something else entirely. I understand, and I am still with you. Clara's grip tightened for a moment. Then she let go and returned to her speech. They worked until midnight, polishing her presentation, thinking of every possible objection, and getting their responses ready. When they finally turned in for the night in their separate rooms, just as they had every night since Clara first arrived, Silas lay wide awake. He stared at the ceiling, wondering if the next day would be the day that saved them, or the day that destroyed them. The Christmas gathering was held at the town hall, a drafty old building that smelled of pine needles and candle wax. By the time Silas and Clara got there at 6:30, the place was already filled to the rafters. There were families, couples, and children running all over the place, chasing one another. Someone had set up a little nativity scene in the corner. There was punch and cookies on a long table. It looked just like a celebration. It was about to become a battlefield. Crow was there, of course, holding court near the front of the room, laughing it up with the mayor and a few council members. He saw Silas and Clara walk in, and his smile grew even wider. He raised his glass to them in a mocking salute. Clara paid him no mind. She found a spot near the side wall and set down her satchel, which was filled with all their evidence. Silas stood right beside her, his eyes scanning the crowd. Martinson was there. So was the widow Hendricks. Tom Brennan stood near the back, looking mighty nervous. He saw 3 other ranchers he recognized, but did not know by name. That made 6 witnesses in total, maybe 7, if that reporter Pierce showed up. The mayor called for everyone's attention at 7 o'clock sharp. Welcome, everyone, to Bitter Creek's annual Christmas gathering. Before we get to the festivities, we have got a few announcements. Clara waited patiently through the mayor's long speech, through the pastor's blessing, and through 2 little children reciting poems about snow and angels. Her hands rested steady on her satchel, but Silas could see the tension coiled in her shoulders. Finally, the mayor asked, "Does anyone else have any announcements before we move on to the refreshments?" Clara stood up. "I do." Every single head in the room swiveled to look at her. The mayor blinked. "Mrs. Boone, I did not realize. I have evidence of systematic fraud and environmental poisoning that is destroying ranches all across this county." Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. "And I intend to present that evidence right here, tonight, in front of all these witnesses." The room went completely silent. Crow's smile evaporated. He set his glass down on a table. "This is hardly the time or the place for such things. This is exactly the time and the place. Christmas is a celebration of truth, justice, and salvation." Clara laid out her first piece of paper. "For the last 18 months, Harland Crow has been poisoning the water, plain and simple, all to force hard-working ranchers to sell out so he can snatch up their land for next to nothing." A low grumble started to spread through the room. The mayor put up his hands. "Ms. Boone, them are some mighty heavy claims. They are not claims. They are facts." Clara held up a small glass bottle. "This here is water from Silas Boone's South Creek, tested by an outside party, and it has 15 times the safe amount of copper in it. That poison is coming from mining runoff that was purposely sent away from Mr. Crow's operation 2 miles up the creek." "That is just plain foolish," Crow said, but his voice was stretched thin. "Mining runoff is controlled by law. It is if you obey the law. You did not." Clara produced a second paper. "This is the sworn statement from Jack Wheeler, a man who used to work at your mine. He saw you and your foreman with his own 2 eyes digging a ditch that let poisoned water flow right past the safety ponds and straight into our creek system. It is signed, dated, and confirmed by a reporter from the Cheyenne Daily Leader who spoke with him last night." The grumbling grew into a buzz. Crow's face was turning a deep shade of red. "Wheeler is a drunk and a liar. He might be a drunk with proof, and he is not the only one who saw." Clara looked out at the faces in the room. "Mr. Martinson, you lost some of your herd back in the fall." Martinson got to his feet slowly. "I did. 30 head. They had the same sickness as Boone's cattle. Widow Hriss." The widow stood up. "I lost every last one of mine. 42 animals. Tom Brennan." Tom got up. "Crow took my ranch 6 months ago. He used the very same trick. My cattle got sick. The bank said my land was worthless. Then he foreclosed before I could blink, one after another. More ranchers stood up. 6 of them in all, spread throughout the crowd, everyone telling the same sad tale. The room was pure chaos by now. Folks were yelling out questions. The mayor was trying his best to get things back in order. The sheriff just looked lost, not sure what he ought to do. Crow pushed his way to the front. This is a setup, a planned attack by a bunch of failed ranchers looking for someone else to blame for their own bad decisions. This is documented proof. Clara's voice sliced right through the racket. Water tests, soil tests, bank papers showing you got water diversion permits for 6 different properties, and every single one of them is now in foreclosure. Sworn words from your own workers. A pattern so dadgum obvious that even the territorial government cannot turn a blind eye to it. The territorial government does not give a hoot about a few dead cattle or some wild stories from a mail-order bride who has not even been here a month. Crow's voice was getting louder. You do not know a thing about this territory or how things get done around here. I know how cheating works. I laid it all out in Kansas 3 years ago when a cattle buyer was using crooked scales to swindle ranchers. That man is sitting in a jail cell right now. Clara took a step closer. I know how to put together a case built on solid facts. I know how to get the newspapers interested. And I know that men like you are counting on folks being too afraid or too worn out to put up a fight. Crow's eyes got real narrow. You are making a big mistake, Ms. Boone. The mistake was all yours. Poisoning water, tearing families apart, and thinking nobody would ever put the pieces together. Clara turned to face the mayor. I am officially asking for a territorial investigation into Mr. Crow's mining and his land deals. I have 3 complete sets of the evidence right here. 1 for you, 1 for the territorial judge, and 1 for the Cheyenne Daily Leader. The back door creaked open. Edmund Pierce came walking in, holding a notepad. I am Pierce from the Leader. I can tell you all that I have personally confirmed Ms. Boone's claims about the water, and I have spoken with Jack Wheeler. His story is solid and full of details. This whole thing is going in tomorrow's paper. The room just exploded with noise, people yelling, the mayor banging his gavel. And Crow just stood there, stuck in place, his power and influence cracking right before our eyes. Then Crow did something no one saw coming. He laughed. You really think you have won? You think one little newspaper story and a stack of papers changes a thing? He looked over at the sheriff. Arrest these people. The sheriff did not budge. On what charge, sir? Trespassing, bothering me, stealing private information from my mine. I have not stolen a single thing, Clara said. Every water sample came from public creeks and rivers. Every person who spoke up did so on their own free will. Every paper is either a public record or belongs to the people who gave it to me. Then for slander, for telling lies about me. The truth is not slander, Mr. Crow. Pierce was scribbling away in his notebook. And trying to have someone arrested just for showing evidence at a public town meeting. Well, that is going to read real nice in the paper. Crow's face was nearly purple now. All of you are going to be sorry for this, every last one of you. Is that a threat? Clara's voice was low, but it carried. Because threatening people who are about to testify in front of a whole room of witnesses and a newspaper man, that is also going to look mighty fine in print. Silas saw Crow's composure just completely fall apart. The man lunged forward and grabbed a hold of Clara's arm, and Silas moved before he even thought about it. He stepped right between them, giving Crow a shove so hard it sent him stumbling backward. Do not you touch my wife. The sheriff finally made his move, getting between the 2 men. That is enough, everybody. Settle down, settle on down. Crow was breathing heavy. These people are ruining my good name with a pack of lies. Then you can go ahead and file a lawsuit and have your day in court, the mayor said. His voice trembled a bit, but it was steady. Ms. Boone has brought some very serious matters to light. They have got to be looked into the right way. So you are taking her side. I am taking the side of the law. The mayor looked straight at Clara. I will make sure the territorial judge gets your evidence. If these claims have any weight to them. They have weight, Pierce cut in. I have checked enough myself to know this needs a full and proper investigation. Crow looked all around the room. He saw the faces staring back at him, saw the ranchers standing together without saying a word, saw his so-called friends suddenly finding the floor mighty interesting to look at. "Y'all will pay for this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Then he spun around and walked right out, with his men trailing behind him. The quiet that fell over the room after he left was so thick you could feel it. Then Widow Hriss began to clap, slow at first and then a little faster. Martinson joined in, then Tom Brennan, and then the others. Clara just stood there, still holding her packet of papers, looking a little dazed. The mayor cleared his throat. "Well, that was something. I reckon we are done with the town business. Let us move on to the food and drinks." People started to talk again, the sound filling the room. A few of the ranchers walked up to Clara, shaking her hand and telling her thank you. Pierce was moving through the crowd, interviewing folks, his notepad filling up fast. Silas pulled Clara off to the side. "Are you all right?" "I do not know." She was starting to shake now that the rush was wearing off. Did that really happen? You were amazing. I was scared to death." She looked up at him. "He threatened us, Silas, in front of everybody. That means he is running scared. That means we got the upper hand." Silas took both her hands in his. "Clara, you just went up against the most powerful fella in this whole county. You stood right up there and took him down with nothing but the plain truth and a whole lot of grit. We took him down. You were right there. You stood by me. You did all the hard work. You built this whole case. You believed in me. When everybody else thought I was just some foolish woman, you believed in me." Clara's eyes were shining. "That is not nothing, Silas." They just stood there, right in the middle of all the commotion, holding hands while the whole town started to wrap their heads around what they had just seen. Pierce found them about an hour later. "I have got enough here for 3 stories, maybe even 4. This is going to be big news, Ms. Boone. Territory-wide big. Will it be enough to stop him from taking our place? I cannot say for sure, but I can promise you this. By tomorrow morning, every single person in the Wyoming Territory is going to know Harlan Crow's name and what he is being accused of. That kind of attention, well, it makes it real hard for judges to decide things in his favor. It was not a sure thing, but it was hope." They rode back home while the snow had started up again, coming down all soft and quiet. The ranch, it looked different. It was still worn down, still a struggle, but it did not feel like it was dying anymore. Clara went right into the bedroom and fell onto the bed, boots and all, and was fast asleep in a heartbeat. Silas gently laid a blanket over her and went out to check on the cattle. They were all right, still healthy, holding on. When he came back inside, Clara was awake again, sitting at the kitchen table with her journal open. "I could not sleep. Too much spinning around in my head." She looked up. "Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, the day he can foreclose. I know. Even after everything we did tonight, Crow could still find a way to push it through. He could still take this ranch. Then we will figure out what to do next." Silas sat down across the table from her. "We will do it together." Clara was quiet for a good long while. Then she said, "I came out here because I did not have anywhere else to turn. No family left, no good prospects, no other choice. The agency told me you needed a helper on a ranch. And I figured I could at least be useful, pull my own weight, get by. You did a whole lot more than just get by, so did you. You could have put me on a train back east the minute I started stirring up trouble. You could have told me to keep my mouth shut, to not cause any waves, but you did not. You stood with me, even when it was risky." Silas laid his hand over hers on the worn-out kitchen table. "You saved my ranch, Clara. You might have even saved my life. Why on earth would I try to stop you?" "Because most men would," she said quietly. "Most men do not like it when their wives are smarter than they are, or more capable, or more willing to pick a fight." "Well, then most men are bigger fools than I thought," he said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "I sent for a bride because I was backed into a corner. What I got was a partner, the best partner a man could ever pray for." Clara's eyes started to shine with tears again. "We are not out of the woods yet. Crow is not the kind of man to just give up." "I know that," Silas said. "But we are not giving up either." A real smile spread across her face, changing her whole expression. "No, no, we are not. They just sat there in the warm glow of the lamp, their hands clasped together, as the snow fell softly outside and Christmas got closer. Somewhere in Bitter Creek, Harlan Crow was surely plotting his next move. But for right now, in that kitchen, they had won, and that was all that mattered. Morning came around way too soon. When Silas woke up, Clara was already dressed and standing by the window watching the sun rise over the snowy fields. It was Christmas Eve, the day that would decide if they kept their home or lost every last thing. "Did you get any sleep at all?" he asked. "A couple of hours. Same as you," she answered, turning from the window. Her face was tight with worry, with dark circles under her eyes. "Mr. Pierce's article should be out this morning. That ought to put some heat on the judge, but Crow has had all night to figure out his next play." "What kind of play are you thinking?" "I do not know," she said. "And that is what is worrying me, what makes me nervous." Clara walked over to the table where her packets of evidence were still laid out. "We put his business out in the street for everyone to see. That means he cannot hide in the shadows anymore. But it also means he has got nothing left to lose." She looked at Silas. "And a man with nothing to lose is a dangerous man." Silas was pulling on his boots when they heard the sound of horses. It was more than one, and they were coming up fast. They both rushed to the door. In the pale morning light, Silas could count 6 riders making their way toward the house. His hand instinctively went for the rifle he kept by the door. "Hold on," Clara said, grabbing his arm. "Those are not Crow's men." And she was right. The man in the lead was the mayor, still wearing his fine suit from the night before. Riding behind him were Martinson, Tom Brennan, and 3 other local ranchers. Silas opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. "What is going on?" The mayor swung down from his horse, his face looking mighty serious. "We all need to have a talk, right now." They all filed into the small kitchen. Clara got a pot of coffee brewing while the men stood around, looking like they would rather be anywhere else. Finally, the mayor broke the silence. "Crow lit out of here before dawn. He took his foreman and about 10 of his men. Folks are saying they are headed to Cheyenne to have a word with the territorial judge himself." Clara's hand froze right over the coffee pot. "To do what?" "To convince him that all your evidence is a big pile of lies," the mayor said. "To paint you as a troublemaker who is trying to ruin the name of a respected businessman." The mayor then pulled out a folded newspaper. "Pierce's article made it to print this morning. It is bad for Crow, real bad. But that man has friends in Cheyenne. He has got money and he has got influence. He is fixing to bury this whole thing before it ever gets started." "But the article is already out there," Silas argued. "People have seen it. You cannot just make them unsee it." "No," the mayor said, "but you can sure try to ruin the reputation of the person who told the story. Make Clara here look like some hysterical woman. Make you look like a failed rancher looking for a scapegoat. All he has to do is plant enough doubt to make the judge toss this whole investigation out before it even begins." Martinson took a step forward. "And that is why we are all here. We are riding to Cheyenne, too, every last one of us. We are going to speak to the judge in person." Clara just stared at them all. "Y'all would do that?" "You put your neck on the line for all of us last night," Tom Brennan said. "We figure we owe you the same thing." "Crow's got a 6-hour head start on us," the mayor added. "But if we ride like the devil's on our heels, we can make it there by tonight. The judge is not going to make a ruling on Christmas Day, so the foreclosure cannot officially happen until the day after. That buys us some time." Silas felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. "You are risking your own good standing with Crow. You are risking your own ranches." "He has been picking us off one by one for years," Martinson said, his voice firm. "But if we stand together, maybe we actually have a fighting chance." He looked right at Clara. "You showed us how to fight back, and now we are fighting." Clara's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you." "Do not thank us just yet," the mayor said. "We still have got to change a judge's mind." The mayor started for the door. "Get your horses ready. We are leaving in 20 minutes." They rode hard for Cheyenne all through that Christmas Eve morning. a group of 8 riders pushing their horses through the biting wind and the deep snow. Clara rode right next to Silas. Her journal was strapped securely to her saddle, and her face was a mask of sheer determination. Around midday, they pulled into a relay station to give the horses a break. The woman who ran the place, an old gal named Agnes, took one look at their weary group and just shook her head. "You folks are chasing after Harlan Crow, are not you?" "How did you know that?" Silas asked her. "Because he was right here 3 hours ago. He paid me $10 to keep my mouth shut about which way he went." She went ahead and poured them all some coffee anyway. "But I am telling you because I do not take kindly to men who think they can buy a person's silence. He went north through Patterson's Pass. It is a quicker route, but it is mighty dangerous in this kind of weather." "We cannot take that pass," the mayor said, "not without risking our necks." "No," Agnes agreed, "but you can cut through Miller's Canyon. It is a rougher ride, but it will shave off 2 hours if you manage not to fall." Agnes came back and refilled Clara's cup. "That husband of yours," she said, nodding toward Silas, "is he worth all this trouble?" Clara looked over at Silas. A whole conversation passed between them without a single word being spoken. "Yes," she said, "he is." "Well then, you all better get a move on. This weather's about to get a whole lot worse." So they took the route through Miller's Canyon. And Agnes had not been kidding, it was a brutal ride. The trails were narrow, the drops were steep, and the wind felt like it was trying to push them right off the side of the mountain. One of the rancher's horses went lame, so they had to leave it behind. The man had to double up and ride with Martinson. By the time they finally got to Cheyenne, it was pitch black and the snow was coming down thick and heavy. They rode straight for the courthouse, a big stone building that looked tough enough to withstand just about anything. Crow's horses were tied up out front. "He is already in there," Tom Brennan said, his voice low. "We are too late." "We are not too late until the judge makes his ruling," Clara said, swinging down from her horse and grabbing her satchel. "Come on." They barged through the big courthouse doors and found Harlan Crow right there in the clerk's office. He was in the middle of a conversation with a stern-looking man who wore wire-rimmed glasses. That had to be the territorial judge. Crow spun around when he heard them come in. The look of confidence on his face soured into pure fury and a heartbeat. "What in the devil are they doing here, Judge Morrison?" Clara stepped forward. "My name is Clara Boone. I am the one who brought forth the evidence of the water contamination and the fraud. These men are here as witnesses. They are ranchers who have also been harmed by Mr. Crow's business practices." Judge Morrison looked over the whole group of them. "This is all highly unusual. Mr. Crow came here to convince you to throw out the investigation before you even have a chance to investigate," Clara said, cutting him off, "which is exactly the kind of thing a guilty man would do." "That is slander," Crow snarled. "Judge, this woman is not stable. She has been in this territory for less than a month, and she has made it her personal mission to destroy my good name with a bunch of lies." 14 dead cattle is not a lie," Clara shot back. "Water contamination is not a lie. And 6 ranches being foreclosed on, all following the very same pattern, is not a lie." Clara pulled out her packet of evidence. "I have documents. I have independent verification. I have testimony from witnesses. All I am asking is that you look it over before you make up your mind." Judge Morrison took the packet from her and flipped through a few of the pages. "This is quite extensive." "It is thorough," Clara corrected him, "because uncovering the truth requires you to be thorough." "The truth," Crow said, his voice dripping with scorn, "is that this woman is a mail-order bride who showed up knowing a little about livestock and decided she was going to play detective. She has convinced a bunch of failing ranchers that their own poor management is somehow my fault. I saw you dig the drainage ditch." Every head in the room turned. Jack Wheeler was standing in the doorway. He was swaying a bit, but he was sober enough to speak plain. Edmund Pierce, the reporter, was standing right beside him. "Wheeler?" Crow's face went completely white. "What are you—" "I am here to testify," Wheeler said. "Just like I told the newspaper man, and just like I will tell anyone who will listen." He walked forward, a little unsteady on his feet. You paid me to dig that channel, the one that ran from the waste pond straight to the creek. You told me it was just temporary. You told me it was perfectly legal. And then, when I figured out it was not, you fired me and you threatened me to keep my mouth shut. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket. But I kept the work orders. They have got your signature on them. They are dated, and they have got detailed instructions about exactly where I was supposed to dig. The room fell completely silent. Judge Morrison took the work orders from Wheeler and read them over. His face did not give anything away, but you could feel the whole mood in the room change. "Mr. Crow," the judge said, "these papers seem to show a deliberate contamination of the water." "Wheeler is a drunk," Crow stammered. "Those documents could be forgeries." "They are not forgeries," Pierce said, stepping forward. "I checked the signatures myself with the county clerk. They are authentic." Crow was losing his composure. "You cannot possibly believe—" "What I believe does not matter," Judge Morrison said, setting the papers down on the desk. "What matters is the evidence. And Mrs. Boone has presented more than enough evidence to call for a full territorial investigation. As of right now, I'm putting a freeze on all foreclosure proceedings related to Mr. Crow's loans until that investigation is complete." "You cannot do that." "Oh, I can, and I am," the judge said. "If you are an innocent man, the investigation will prove it. And if you are not—" Morrison's eyes were as hard as stone. "Then justice will be served." Crow looked around the room at all the faces staring back at him. He looked at Clara, standing there holding her journal, and at Silas, standing right by her side. He looked at the ranchers who had ridden through a blizzard to see this through. Blizzard just to testify. And there was Wheeler holding work orders that proved every last word. "This is not over," Crow said in a low voice. Then he spoke louder. "Do you think one little investigation changes anything? I have got lawyers, money, and connections that go all the way to—" "To where?" Morrison cut him off. "The territorial legislature, the governor's office? Because I can guarantee you that by tomorrow morning, every newspaper in Wyoming will be running this story. And politicians, they care a whole lot more about public opinion than they care about your connections." It was the sound of a powerful man's world crumbling around him. Crow just stood there, his face turning a shade of purple with rage and something else. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the realization that he had actually lost. He left without saying another word, his men trailing behind him like a pack of whipped dogs. The moment the door slammed shut, Clara's legs gave out from under her. Silas caught her, holding her steady while she shook with a mix of exhaustion and pure relief. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," Silas corrected her. "You are the one who built the case. You stood up to him. We, she interrupted. "We did this together." Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Boone, I'm going to need you to stay in Cheyenne for a few days. We have to conduct formal depositions, witness interviews, the whole official investigation process. Can you do that?" "Yes, absolutely." "Good. There is a boarding house 2 blocks from here. It is clean, and it is safe. Model. Fair prices. Go on and get some rest. We'll hit the ground running tomorrow." The other ranchers headed off to find a place to stay, but Silas and Clara took their time, walking through the snow-dusted streets toward the boarding house. A heavy silence hung between them for the longest time. At last, Silas spoke up. "The ranch is safe, at least for now. This whole investigation could drag on for months. Crow might still try to find a way to get at you." He stopped walking and gently turned her to look him in the eye. "We did it. It might not be forever, and it sure wasn't pretty, but we got the win. Can you just let that sink in for a minute?" She gazed up at him, tiny snowflakes landing in her hair. And it was like a dam inside her finally broke. "I was so scared the entire time. I was just terrified we were going to fail, that you would lose everything and it would all be my fault for pushing you so hard. Hey now, none of that." Silas pulled her into a warm hug. "Not one bit of this is on you. You're the one who saved me. You saved the ranch. You saved half a dozen other folks who were about to lose it all if you hadn't stood up." Clara buried her face in his thick coat. He could feel her body shaking with quiet, hiccuping sobs she must have been holding back for weeks. I didn't come out here to save anybody. I came because there was nowhere else for me to go. I know that. And I sent for you because I was going under. He tilted her chin up so she'd look at him. But somewhere between that first night and right now, this stopped being about just getting by and started being about something else. What? Silas leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a desperate kiss or a hungry one, but a gentle one, full of promise. When he pulled back, Clara's eyes were wide with surprise. I wasn't expecting that. Me neither. But Clara, you are the strongest person I have ever known. The smartest and the bravest, too. And somewhere in these last 3 weeks, I quit seeing you as the woman I ordered in the mail and started seeing you as the woman I... He trailed off, the words catching in his throat. As the woman you what? As the woman I want. Not because I'm in a bind. Not because I need a hand. Just because you are you. Clara let out a little snort and was quiet for a good long while. Then she said, I've never had a soul look at me the way you're looking at me right this second. And how am I looking at you? Like I'm not just a person who's useful. Like I'm actually wanted, valued. Like I matter for more than just what I can do for someone. You do matter. Lord Clara, you matter more than you know. This time she was the one who kissed him, with a fire that was claiming something she knew was hers. They made their way to the boarding house and got 2 separate rooms. A bit of propriety still seemed important, even after their victory. But they stayed up in Clara's room until the sun was nearly peeking over the horizon, talking about all the things they never had a moment to talk about before. She told him about her childhood, and he told her about his marriage to Sarah. And they both talked about the long years of hardship and loneliness that led them to that matrimonial service. I don't regret a single bit of it, Clara said at last. Coming here, marrying you, none of it. Even when I had my doubts about you, you never doubted me. You questioned me, which is a whole different thing. It's healthy. She rested her head on his shoulder. You put your trust in me when it counted the most. That's all that matters. They spent Christmas Day giving their statements. Judge Morrison was a thorough man, asking questions that sent Clara to her journal a dozen times to check on facts and dates. Wheeler gave his testimony again, his voice still shaky, but his words were true. The other ranchers told their stories too. By nightfall, Morrison had everything he needed to move forward with a full-blown investigation. He put a territorial marshal in charge of looking into Crow's mining operation firsthand, taking official water samples, and talking to every person who had worked there in the past 2 years. This is going to take a while, he told Clara. Probably a few months. But from what I'm seeing here, criminal charges are almost certain. Destruction of the land, fraud, and maybe even conspiracy. What happens to the foreclosures? They're frozen solid until this investigation is over. If Crow is found guilty, they'll be thrown out completely, and your husband's debt will be renegotiated. Morrison paused for a moment. You did a fine thing here, Mrs. Boone. It's rare to see evidence laid out so plainly now. On the train pulling back toward Bitter Creek, Clara sat close to Silas, watching the Wyoming land slide past the window. The country didn't seem quite as mean as before. It was still a hard place. Still didn't forgive mistakes, but a person could make a life here. What are we going to do now? She asked him. We're going home. We'll run the ranch and wait for this whole investigation to be over. And after that, we just keep on living. Together. Silas reached over and took her hand. Unless you're fixing to go somewhere else. I got no other plans. Clara wove her fingers into his. But Silas, there's something I have to tell you about the real reason I came out here. A knot tightened in his gut. All right, that matrimonial agency. I didn't just sign up because I was out of choices. I signed up because I'd spent 6 long years learning from a healer. He taught me everything he knew about doctoring livestock, and then he told me no one would ever take me seriously because I was a woman. He said the best I could ever hope for was to marry some rancher who might let me fool with his animals like a hobby. Her voice was sharp with old anger. So when the agency said you needed help on a ranch, I figured maybe this was my chance to prove that man wrong. Maybe I could finally put my knowledge to good use. You do matter, more than you can ever know. I think I'm starting to see that. She looked straight at him. But you need to understand something. I'm not going to stop learning or studying or helping sick animals. If we're going to be partners, for real, you have to accept that I'm never going to be a typical rancher's wife. Silas let out a laugh, a real, honest-to-goodness laugh. Clara, honey, you figured out my cattle were being poisoned by copper. You built a whole case against the most powerful man in this county, and you stood up and testified before a territorial judge. Typical left the station about 3 weeks ago. I don't want Typical. I want you. The relief that washed over her face was a beautiful thing to see. Good. Because I've been thinking, once all this is behind us, once things calm down, I could offer my services to other ranchers. I could teach them what I know about keeping their livestock healthy. We could build something that helps not just our ranch, but this whole community. I think that's a fine idea. You really think so? Clara, you saved 6 ranches just by sharing what you know. Just imagine what you could do if you made it your actual job. He gave her hand a squeeze. I'll back you up any way I can. She leaned over and kissed him right then and there on the train and didn't care one bit who was watching. They pulled into Bitter Creek just as the sun was going down the day after Christmas. The ranch looked just the same. A little run-down, still struggling, held together by little more than hope and old fence wire. But it was theirs, and it was going to stay that way. The cattle out in the north pasture were looking better now, their coats getting shiny and their eyes clear and bright. Clara walked right out among them, putting her expert hands on each one, murmuring softly. Silas just watched her, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't just relief, and it wasn't just being grateful. It was something deeper, something that felt a whole lot like coming home. Later that night, they sat out on the porch, ignoring the cold. Clara had her journal open on her lap, already making plans for her new consulting service. Silas was sketching out some fence repairs on a scrap of paper. We probably ought to have a proper wedding, Clara said, breaking the quiet. A real one, not just some papers signed by a stranger. Silas looked up from his drawing. You'd want that? I want folks to know that this is real, that we chose this. She held his gaze. Did we? Did we choose each other? Yeah, I reckon we did. Then we ought to celebrate it right. Maybe in the spring, after this investigation is all settled. Something simple. Simple sounds just about perfect. They sat there in a comfortable quiet, sketching out a future that hadn't even been possible 3 weeks earlier. The stars popped out in the cold, clear sky. Off in the distance, a coyote let out a long, lonely howl. Silas. Yeah? Thank you. For trusting a woman you'd never met. For believing in me, for standing by me even when things got dangerous. And thank you for saving my life more than once. He pulled her in closer. We make a pretty good team. The best, Clara said with a smile, and sitting there on that rickety old porch on a ranch that had nearly been lost, with a woman who had arrived as part of a deal and had become his whole world, Silas Boone finally understood what surviving truly meant. It meant you didn't quit. It meant you found your strength in places you never expected. It meant building a partnership on respect, not on one person saving the other. It meant choosing to face whatever came next, together. Winter dragged on. The territorial investigation moved slower than a snail in January, and every day without a final word felt like they were standing on thin ice, just waiting for it to crack. Clara kept busy doctoring cattle for the neighbors. Word had gotten around about how she'd saved Silas's herd, and desperate men started showing up at all hours, leading sick animals and holding out payments they could barely spare. She never said no. You're going to make us go broke with all your charity work, Silas told her one morning as he watched her treat a neighbor's heifer for bloat. I'm building trust. When I turn this into a real business, these folks will remember. Clara pushed gently on the animal's swollen side. Besides, half of them are paying me with their labor. We got 3 sections of fence repaired last week. That's payment. Everything is payment if you know how to bargain. By February, she had treated animals from 14 different ranches. By March, she had a waiting list. Then the telegram arrived. Silas had ridden into town for supplies and came back looking like he'd seen a ghost, a flimsy yellow paper trembling in his hand. What is it? What happened? Clara ran to meet him at the barn. The investigation is over. Judge Morrison wants us in Cheyenne next week for the ruling. Clara felt her stomach drop to the floor. Does it say what he decided? No, just that we have to be there. Silas held out the telegram. This is it, Clara. We either win this thing or we lose everything we have. Neither of them slept a wink that night. Clara paced back and forth in the kitchen, going over every piece of evidence they'd gathered, trying to find any weak spot that Crow's lawyers could tear apart. Silas just sat at the table watching her wear a rut in the floorboards. What if it's not enough? She finally said, her voice barely a whisper. What if we did all this work and Morrison still rules for Crow? Then we'll appeal it. We'll keep fighting. With what? With what money? Clara stopped pacing. Silas, if we lose this, we're done. You don't know that for sure. No, but I know you. I know how careful you were with every detail. He got up from the table and took her hands in his. Whatever happens in Cheyenne, we'll face it together. That's all that matters. It wasn't all that mattered, not really. But for now, it had to be enough. The train to Cheyenne was filled with other ranchers. Martinson was there, and Tom Brennan, and the widow Hendricks, along with a dozen others who had either testified against Crow or had lost their land to one of his schemes. They took up a whole car, and the air was thick with nervous tension. He's going to get away with it, Martinson said quietly to Silas. Men like Crow always do. Not this time, Clara said, though she didn't feel nearly as sure as she sounded. The courtroom was so crowded you couldn't have squeezed in another soul. There was press from 3 territories, folks who were just curious, and politicians who could smell a scandal they could use. And there was Crow, sitting with 4 lawyers in fancy suits, looking as calm as if he'd already won. Judge Morrison came in and the whole room stood up. He looked even older than he had at Christmas, as if the burden of this case had carved new lines into his face. Y'all be seated. We have a lot of ground to cover today. For 2 solid hours, Morrison read from his findings. The water contamination was confirmed by outside experts. The drainage ditches were examined, and they matched Wheeler's testimony perfectly. 6 different ranches all showed the same pattern of sick cattle, foreclosure, and a quick sale to Crow. The financial records proved that Crow had known about the poison in the water for more than a year. Crow's main lawyer kept jumping up to object, and Morrison just kept shutting him down. Finally, the judge put his papers down and stared right at Crow. Mr. Crow, based on all the evidence that's been presented and investigated, this court finds you guilty of deliberate destruction of the environment, of fraud, and of conspiracy to illegally take possession of property through planned sabotage. The courtroom exploded. Crow leaped to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't possibly. I can, and I have. All foreclosures connected to your contaminated water sources are officially dismissed. All outstanding debts will be reorganized under the supervision of the territory. And you are personally responsible for the damages done to the affected ranchers. Morrison's voice sliced through the noise. And what's more, I am turning this entire case over to the Territorial Attorney General for criminal charges to be filed. Bailiff, take Mr. Crow into custody. Crow's face turned a dark, ugly shade of red. You are making a terrible mistake. I have powerful friends. Your friends are welcome to visit you in prison. Morrison slammed his gavel down. This court is adjourned. The bailiff started walking toward Crow. For just a second, Silas thought the big man was going to put up a fight. His hands clenched into tight fists, his whole body went rigid. But then, all the fight just seemed to drain right out of him. They led him out of the courtroom in chains. Clara just stood there, completely still, like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. All around her, ranchers were yelling and cheering, and some were even crying. Martinson grabbed her up in a big bear hug that lifted her clean off the floor. "We did it, you crazy woman, we actually did it." Silas made his way through the happy crowd and pulled her close. "It's over," he said softly. "We're free." But Clara's mind was already jumping ahead. The restructured debt. "We still owe the bank money. They're going to want—" "Clara." Silas gently turned her face up to his. "We won. Can you for just 1 minute? Please. Just enjoy it." She tried to make her lips form a smile. It didn't quite work. She tried again. This time it held. "We won," she whispered, and then said it louder, for herself to hear. "We won." The celebration went on long into the night. The ranchers bought rounds of drinks at every saloon in Cheyenne. That reporter, Price, was interviewing anybody who would stand still. Even Judge Morrison made an appearance, shaking hands and accepting thanks with a quiet sort of grace. But Clara slipped away from the party early. She found a quiet spot in their boarding house and sat down with her journal. Silas found her there about an hour later. "You all right?" "I just keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For Crow to have one last trick up his sleeve, for this whole ruling to get overturned." She looked up at him. "When does it start to feel real?" "Maybe it never does. Maybe we just have to get up every morning and go to work until we start to believe it." He sat down next to her. "What are you writing?" "Notes. For my consulting business. If we're really going to do this, I need to make it official. Set my rates, list my services, figure out how to keep proper records." Her pen was already moving fast across the page. "Martinson already asked me if I'd consult on his breeding program. Livestock. Widow Hendricks needs some help getting a new rotation system set up for her pastures. This could really work out, Silas. I know it can. I've been watching it work for the last 3 months." They got back to Bitter Creek and found their ranch changed by something you couldn't see but could surely feel. It was hope. The cattle looked healthier than they had in 2 long years. The fences Silas had mended in exchange for Clara's help stood tall and straight. Spring was knocking on the door early that year, with the snow melting into that good kind of mud that promised fresh green grass. But the biggest change was in town. Folks who had been avoiding Silas for months were now stopping him right on the street just to congratulate him. The bank, which had new people in charge after Crow's arrest, offered to restructure his loan with fair terms. The general store gave him a line of credit again. "It feels strange," Silas said as he loaded supplies into the wagon, "being treated like I'm somebody again." "You were always somebody. They just couldn't see past their fear of Crow." Clara ticked items off her list. "Fear can make people mean, but being free again lets them be decent." That next Sunday, the preacher asked Clara if she would say a few words during the service. She stood up at the front of that little church, facing a room full of people who had mostly given her the cold shoulder for 3 months, and she spoke plain. "I came to this place as a stranger, a mail-order bride, who didn't have a thing to her name but what she knew, and a stubborn streak. A few of you made me feel welcome. Most of you did not. And that's all right. I know I was different and pushed hard, and I made some powerful folks mighty uncomfortable." She took a breath. "But I have learned a thing or two about this town. Y'all aren't cruel people. Y'all are not cowards. You are just folks trying to make it in a hard land. And when you finally decided to stand as one, when you picked the truth over being afraid, you became something stronger than any one of us could ever be on our own." Somebody in the back started clapping. Then another person joined in, and soon the whole church was applauding. After the service, Widow Hendricks came up to her. "I had you all wrong, Mrs. Boone. I thought you were nothing but trouble." "I am trouble, just the kind that's useful." The widow let out a laugh. "I have a proposition for you. I've been running my ranch by myself since my husband passed. I've thought about hiring a hand, but what I really need is someone who understands the animals, someone I can trust. Would you think about a partnership? I'll put up the land and the money. You put up the know-how. Clara just blinked. You want to go into business with me? I want to learn from you, and I want my ranch to make it. It seems to me we could help each other out. The widow stuck out her hand. You think on it. Clara shook it. I will. Back at the ranch, she told Silas about the widow's offer. He listened close, then asked the very question she'd been asking herself. What do you want to do? I just don't know. A part of me wants to say yes right this minute, but this ranch, what we're building here, I don't want to just walk away from it. You wouldn't be. We'd still run this place, you and me. But Clara, you've got a knowledge that could help dozens of ranches around here. To keep it all just for us feels, well, it feels small. Silas took both of her hands in his. I married you expecting to get a helper. What I got was a woman who could change this entire territory. Don't you dare make yourself small just to fit in the box I first imagined for you. You really mean that? Every last word. By April, Clara had advised 18 different ranches, treated over 40 head of cattle, and had taught 3 ranchers' daughters the basics of animal medicine. The money wasn't a fortune, but it was steady. More important than that, it was hers, earned with her own skill, not given out of pity. She took the partnership with Widow Hendricks, but with one condition. They would train other women in livestock medicine, building a whole network of knowledge that couldn't be wiped out if one person decided to leave. The first 3 apprentices began their training in May. The wedding was on a Sunday in late spring, not because they needed to get married all over again, but because Clara wanted to stand up in front of everybody and choose Silas for all to see. No proxy this time, no desperation, just a choice. The entire town showed up. There were ranchers whose cattle she had saved, and families whose folks Silas's father had helped out decades before. Even Judge Morrison made the long ride from Cheyenne. Clara wore a simple dress of blue. Silas wore his best suit, the very one he had worn when he married Sarah. That should have felt wrong, but for some reason it didn't. Sarah was a part of his past. Clara was his future. It was possible for both things to be true. The preacher kept his words short. Do you, Silas Boone, take Clara Whitmore Boone as your wife, chosen of your own free will and loved with all your heart? I do. And do you, Clara Whitmore Boone, take Silas Boone as your husband, chosen of your own free will and loved with all your heart? Clara looked at this man who had put his faith in a complete stranger, who had stood right by her side against impossible odds, who had believed in her when she could barely believe in herself. I do. The kiss was gentle. The applause was like a clap of thunder. At the party afterward, held in their barn because it was the biggest place they had, Morrison raised his glass. To the woman who saved every one of us by simply refusing to be quiet and sit down. To partnership over possession, Tom Brennan called out. To choosing to fight instead of just accepting defeat, said Widow Hendricks. Clara stood up and raised her own glass. To desperate choices that turn into something worth holding on to strangers who become family, and to survival that ends up looking a whole lot like victory. And they all drank to that. Later that evening, after the party had wound down and the last of the guests were gone, Clara and Silas sat together on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon on the land they had come so close to losing. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked him. Sending away for a bride instead of doing things the way everyone else does? The normal way never would have brought you to me. So no, not for a second. Silas pulled her in close. I regret the hard times that made it necessary. But the choice itself, the man I found, the life we've made. She leaned in and kissed him. No regrets at all. 1 year later, the ranch was making a profit. They weren't rich, but they were stable. The herd had grown to 90 head, and every one of them was healthy. The barn had a brand new roof. The fences stood tall and strong. Clara's consulting business had spread across 3 territories. She had trained 9 women in animal medicine, and each one was running her own practice. The network they had all built meant that no single rancher had to face a disaster all alone anymore. Knowledge was shared freely. Help was always nearby. She had also written a manual on cattle sicknesses and cures, which was sold in general stores all across Wyoming. The money from those sales went into a fund for women who wanted to study veterinary medicine. Silas was expanding the ranch, but slowly, buying 200 acres of land right next to their property, from a rancher who was ready to hang it all up. They worked that place side by side. Clara took care of all the doctoring, while Silas handled the breeding stock and the money side of things. Folks pretty soon stopped thinking of them as 2 different people. They were just the Boones, a single unit, a real force to be reckoned with. One December evening, almost 2 years to the day after Clara first set foot there, they were watching their cattle munching peacefully on land they nearly lost. "You know what crossed my mind today?" Clara asked him. "What's that?" he said. "That wire I sent you, agreeing to your offer. I almost tore it up. I nearly talked myself into thinking that staying put in Missouri was the safe bet, safer than taking a chance on a man I'd never met in Wyoming." "What made you change your mind?" "I figured out that being safe and being alive are 2 different things. I was just getting by, not really living. And I was plain tired of just getting by." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Coming out here was the scariest thing I'd ever done. Marrying you was pure craziness, and going up against Crow felt like a fool's errand. But it was also the first time in my whole life I felt like I counted for something. Like what I knew how to do and who I was had some real worth. You count for more than you could ever know." Silas turned her to look him in the eye. "You saved my ranch, my own hide, and about 30 other spreads in the bargain. You built a business clean from scratch. You're making this whole territory rethink what a woman with knowledge and grit can do. That ain't just counting for something, Clara. That's making history. We're making history, you and me." She gave him a kiss. "That's the only part that really matters." They just stood there while the sun dipped low, painting the snow on the prairie in shades of gold and rose. Off in the distance, a calf called out for its mama. A little closer, you could hear their horses snorting softly in the barn, content as could be. This very land had tried its best to break the both of them. The sheer desperation that threw them together could have torn them apart, but it didn't. Instead, they took that hardship and hammered it into something stronger than either one of them ever dreamed of. It wasn't him saving her, or a business deal, or even just clawing to survive. It was a partnership built solid on respect, tested in the fire, and proven every single day when they chose over and over to stand together, come what may. Clara had stepped off that train in Wyoming as a bride from a catalog with one little bag and a journal filled with wisdom the world insisted was worthless. She became the woman who proved that kind of wisdom, paired with courage and a refusal to be beaten, could change not just her own life, but a whole community. And Silas, who'd sent for a wife because he was fixing to lose it all, he learned that sometimes the best things you'll ever find come from the wildest chances, as long as you're brave enough to recognize a gift when you see it, and wise enough to help it grow into something real. They had both come to that ranch broken down and nearly hopeless. Together they rebuilt it, and in doing so, they rebuilt themselves into something worth fighting for. And that was the real win. It wasn't the piece of paper from the judge or the ranch they saved or the money they made. It was the choice they made every morning to be partners, to put their trust in each other, to build something together that neither one of them could have ever built on their own. And as the first stars started to pop out in that big Wyoming sky, over the land they'd paid for with blood, sweat, and a stubborn streak a mile wide, Clara and Silas Boone stood together and knew one thing down to their bones. A rough start doesn't get to decide how a story ends. Courage, teamwork, and just plain refusing to ever give up, that's what does. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.